Good morning. So I'd like to begin today's talk by reading the first few lines of the Shinshin Ming, often translated as the Faith in Mind poem, or also sometimes referred to as the Inscription of the Perfect Mind, attributed to Singsan, the third Shan patriarch, believed to have lived around the 6th century. The great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences. Let go of longing and aversion, and it reveals itself. Make the smallest distinction, however, and you are as far from it as heaven is from earth. If you want to realize the truth, then hold no opinions for or against anything. Like and dislike is the disease of the mind. When the deep meaning of the way is not understood, the intrinsic peace of the mind is disturbed. So I'm going to read it one more time, a bit slower. Please listen again. The great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences. Let go of longing and aversion, and it reveals itself. Make the smallest distinction, however, and you are as far from it as heaven is from earth. If you want to realize the truth, then hold no opinions for or against anything. Like and dislike is the disease of the mind. When the deep meaning of the way is not understood, the intrinsic peace of the mind is disturbed. So ends that reading. So 2023 has been a tough year, at least according to my ego, which has taken things pretty personal, especially in these last few weeks and months. The year began with a serious cancer diagnosis in the family, which elicited grief and fear, anxiety, and an uncertainty. Gratefully, though, this family member has responded exceptionally well, and treatment is nearing completion with a full recovery expected. There have been I've had numerous reactions and frustrations, disappointments and anger provoked by all kinds of things, various cultural, social, political, legal events over the course of the year, some of which have had consequential personal impact. This year has also distinguished itself as my most trying and stressful year of my professional career, as my department has recently suffered its most significant staffing cut since the early 90s, and the ongoing acquisition and consolidation that's still unfolding has undermined and insulted the integrity of my discipline and vocation, and is threatening to erase 6 years of work and career-defining work. So with all these events and more, my physical health has also deteriorated, leading to a new chronic diagnosis for myself and a loss of some part of my former self in many ways. Although I'm not embarrassed to admit it, I do regret that this is also the year that I've neglected probably my spiritual practices the most as well, when obviously I needed them the most with all these other things going on. And this still periodically reignites feelings of guilt and shame. For nearly the last 10 years, my sole focus and priority and meaning has been wrapped up in my work. And it's taken pretty much until now for all of this suffering to really catch up and to both realize and pay the cost of living an imbalanced life, which set my personal, social, and spiritual health on the back burner. Now I find myself checking all the boxes of the classic definition of burnout: emotional exhaustion, cynicism, reduced accomplishment, physical symptoms, loss of motivation, and even cognitive impairment. I can't focus and concentrate or find the motivation that I once did. So this contradiction and hypocrisy is not lost on me. As a Buddhist monk and chaplain, I have not been practicing what I've been preaching for a little while. And this disconnect between these dimensions of my life have exacerbated my stress even further and led to these constant thoughts of failure and self-blame, which have in turn, it's been a vicious cycle, fueling a crisis of identity, meaning, and purpose, and resurface feelings of imposter syndrome. The ego certainly is complex. It can twist and distort reality to build itself up, but it also does a pretty good job of punishing and hurting itself too. For me, I find it a bit easier maybe to intellectualize and lecture and talk about letting go and accepting change. That's one thing. The words are easy enough to say. And the concepts equally easy to agree with in principle. But actually doing so, especially when it's not on your own terms or look the way you want it to, is quite another and rather unpleasant, especially when said change feels like an assault on one's own ego and values. It turns out that the words of the Shinshin Ming, hold no opinions for or against anything, are pretty hard to put into practice. For a while, the guiding light of the lamppost of the precepts that we talk about feels like they've kind of grown dim and faint. Sometimes I think that if my life were a video game, maybe I could just hit the reset button or restart. And I know that I have this perfectionist complex that often gets in my own way. So the Buddha was not joking, and the compilers of the Dhammapada knew what they were doing when the opening line of the opening chapter begins with the 7 words, "Our life is shaped by our mind." I also know that I really don't have anything to legitimately complain about either. I'm still overall healthy, able-bodied, able-minded, have a well-paying job for now, and comfortable life. I have a loving and supportive family, not lacking any basic needs. In fact, still have more luxuries and privilege than the majority of the world and humankind will ever know. And yet, this ego, this selfish mind-body aggregate, all these vexations and distorted imaginary injustices, it tells itself. I started exploring Buddhism and first took the precepts on May 7th, 2006 in Chicago with Sunim and Sunim. That was 17 years ago. It's been 12 years since I've been ordained a monk. Yet here I am, still as self-centered and self-absorbed as before, or worse, a spiritual regression or decay. Or so, again, this is part of the story my ego tells itself. So I don't say any of this to necessarily draw out any sympathy or empathy. And I can imagine it may also either be concerning or unsettling to hear these kind of remarks from behind this podium. It may feel uncomfortable or confusing to hear such things from a monk who who carries his honorific title of venerable, meaning one worthy of veneration and respect. And in a public Dharma talk nonetheless, which one might assume to be inspirational rather than confessional. In chaplaincy training that I went through, there's a strong emphasis on honest and intimate self-reflection and introspection. Both vulnerability and authenticity are highly valued and ingrained in that training. That we all hold preferences, paradoxes, and contradictions, likes and dislikes, diseases of the mind. We all create and embody distinctions, opinions, judgments, and engage in negative self-talk from time to time. They really challenge our peace and equanimity and separate us from being in harmony with reality. So my goal for this talk this morning is to share an honest accounting of my own path at this specific point in my life, and just how challenging this path and practice can be. It's not a one-way street. So whether you've been practicing or maybe lapsed in practice at some point for either days or decades, it can happen at any time. So obviously I don't come bearing a tidy package of cliches and about the panacea of mindfulness or meditation that we've all heard from various places and sources. No quick or easy fixes. No presentation from an ego trying to prop itself up or make itself look good. Or maybe it is, I don't know. Although the ego certainly does defend itself. Well, I said a few minutes ago that I wasn't embarrassed to share what I've been sharing. The ego fights back in subtle but assertive ways. Even this morning before coming here to the temple, my ego decided to infuse a little bit more fear and anxiety, telling me that I shouldn't have this talk recorded or made public. Maybe another effort to either preserve some figment of a reputation, if I have one at all, or maybe avoid criticism or feedback or opinions. So again, the words of Sung San both resonate and challenge. Hold no preferences for or against anything. The ego doesn't like it. It's like pouring antiseptic directly on a wound. There's this impulsive recoil that can happen. The three poisons of the mind, right? Delusion, greed, and aversion can be quite insidious and resilient. So honestly, returning to practice and both undoing maladaptive habits and reforming healthy habits is also challenging. The ego can get quite comfortable in playing up its victim card and exercise a bunch of tricks to reify all kinds of beliefs and stories. The story that the ego has worked so hard to build up goes into a kind of survival mode and digs its heels in to protect itself. And changing the narrative and habit energy is usually not as easy as flipping a switch. But fortunately, there have been a few particular teachings that have helped me to recalibrate and kind of reorient myself to a more healthy and balanced perspective, to right the ship, if you will, and to relight these lampposts. One recitation that I've reintroduced into my rekindled daily ritual is the 10th century Korean Zen master Chinul's 10 guides along the path. What kind of connected with me re-looking at this list was somewhat of the hopelessness and diminished expectations that can be extraordinarily helpful. Number one, don't hope for perfect health. Perfect health leads only to greater greed. Number 2, don't long for a life free from hardship. Such a life leads only to haughtiness and self-pampering. 3, don't hope for a lack of impediments in your study. 4, don't hope for a lack of temptations in your training. A lack of temptations will only serve to soften your resolve. 5, don't hope for easy success. Easy accomplishment leads only to increased rashness. Number 6, don't hope to get your own way with friends. Having friends give in to your wishes only leads to arrogance. Number 7, don't expect people to follow your wishes or commands. This too leads to arrogance. Number 8, don't expect rewards for your kindness. This only leads to a scheming mind. Number 9, don't expect more out of life than you deserve. Exaggerated profit-seeking leads only to foolishness. Number 10, don't complain about vexations. This leads only to resentment and poison in the heart. A lot of Stoic wisdom also resonates with me. While rereading some of the wisdom of the Stoic philosophers, especially such as Epictetus, had me thinking about all this, and something that came up, at least in the reading of some of the Stoic literature, about this idea or notion of apathy. Because there are feelings at times with all the stress, and especially things going at work, just throwing up my hands and say, fuck it, I'm not going to do it anymore. It's not worth the hassle. It's not worth the stress. All right. So looking this up, interestingly, the original sense, the etymology of apathy, comes from the Greek, which means no feeling or no emotion or no suffering. In the original Greek, emotion and suffering were the same root, the same word. And the Stoics, back thousands of years ago, believed that one could achieve tranquility and wisdom by cultivating emotional detachment and indifference to external circumstances, right? To disengage. Epictetus is probably most famous for talking about the dichotomy of control, being able to differentiate what is within one's own control and what's outside of one's own control or influence. So when Epictetus says things like people are not disturbed by things, but by the views they take of them, seems to make sense. And also that we are not worried by real problems as much as by our imagined anxieties about real problems. Also interesting. And this wisdom, this kind of Dharma, if you will, that Epictetus is credited for, has echoed through the centuries, up to another thinker and human being that I read a lot about and share a lot about in some of my other lectures, Viktor Frankl, the Auschwitz survivor, psychiatrist who wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning. He also reminded us when he invoked the dichotomy of control, understanding when he wrote, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. And that between the stimulus and the response, there's a space between that. Very helpful. But apathy in modern usage usually gets a bad rap, right? About just totally disengaged and not caring. Right? But if we perceive it positively as a type of kind of balanced detachment of sorts, it can have numerous potential benefits. Stress reduction, improved decision making, enhanced focus, conflict avoidance, increased resilience, improved objectivity, energy conservation, foster independence, crisis management, and prevention of burnout. Thanks AI for that, because I asked AI all the benefits of that. So it gave me a nice list. Right? I didn't have to go looking for all those. But rather than apathy, in Buddhist wisdom and Buddhist sutras and writing, we're probably more likely to encounter the moral virtue of equanimity instead, which advocates not emotional detachment or avoidance, but rather mental and emotional stability in the face of challenging or stressful situations, and not being swayed by extreme emotions, and focuses more on engagement rather than disengagement. And again, I hear my ego, apathy is a lot easier rather than cultivating equanimity, right? It's easy not to care about things and just throw your hands up and start detaching, right? Equanimity is the bigger ask, the bigger call. And it is, after all, one of the 4 divine abodes, or one of the Brahma Viharas. And actually, Buddhist thought regards apathy as the near enemy of equanimity, since it can superficially resemble it. So you got to be careful there. Greed, on the other hand, is the far enemy of equanimity. So in my experience this year and looking back, I can see how so much of my mental energy was marked by greed and resistance. I don't think we think about greed enough, or at least we think about it too narrowly, maybe. Greed's not just about material greed for money or wealth or possessions, but it can also be attachment to our views, our beliefs, our opinions, our preferences, our situations and conditions, our relationships. Not wanting things to change or to only change on our terms is a type of greed, maybe an attachment to the past. So fortunately, I believe my turning point I hope it is, came recently a few weeks ago when I was in to see my primary care physician based on some of the health concerns I was having. And he asked me if I had any stress. I couldn't help but laugh and also kind of feel annoyed by his response, like, are you freaking kidding me? But it kept bugging me for the last few weeks since he asked this. I know it's protocol for, the conversation we were having. So when he asked me if I had any stress, I told him some of my complaints, including the stress at work. His response, don't be stressed. Okay. So in the past few weeks, something in my past, in my history, in my mind, started coming back to the forefront. And it was my first undergraduate Asian philosophy course, now almost 20 years ago. Came back in my conscious awareness. Lao Tzu and the Tao Te Ching. But maybe that was also provoked by something that happened last week when I was in a manager's meeting and someone read from the Tao of Pooh. The opening reading from the Faith and Mind poem that we started with parallels many Taoist concepts, including the most well-known Taoist concept of Wu Wei, or effortless action, sometimes also translated as non-action. Wu Wei, this idea, is marked by ideas like flowing with the moment, no forced effort, trusting your own intuition, being in harmony, and letting go of control. In essence, Wu Wei teaches us to live a more balanced and peaceful life by going with a natural flow of things rather than constantly pushing and striving and fighting and resisting to manipulate and control. So I dug up, I still have my original copy of the Tao Te Ching that I used from that course. And I reread it, all of its brief 81 chapters, and amalgamated and kind of piecemeal together my own arrangement that resonates based on my kind of current conditions and circumstances and seems fitting for the moment. So to close my talk this morning, I'll share with you the selected arrangement that I did for myself from the Tao Te Ching, this translation from Stephen Mitchell. And again, I'll read this a little more slowly than usual to help us listen and absorb each line, because there's a lot here. Stop thinking and end your problems. What difference between yes and no? What difference between success and failure? Success or failure, which is more destructive? Failure is an opportunity. If you blame someone else, there is no end to the blame. He who clings to his work will create nothing that endures. If you want to accord with the way, just do your job, then let go. He understands that the universe is forever out of control and that trying to dominate events goes against the current of the way. The master does not seek fulfillment, not seeking, not expecting. She is present and can welcome all things. If you open yourself to loss, you are at one with loss, and you can accept it completely. When there is no desire, all things are at peace. Do you want to improve the world? I don't think it can be done. The world is sacred. It cannot be improved. If you tamper with it, you will ruin it. If you treat it like an object, you will lose it. There's a time for being ahead, a time for being behind, a time for being in motion, a time for being at rest, a time for being vigorous, a time for being exhausted, a time for being safe, a time for being in danger. The master sees things as they are without trying to control them. He never expects results. Thus, he is never disappointed. Less and less do you need to force things until finally you arrive at non-action. When nothing is done, nothing is left undone. True mastery can be gained by letting things go their own way. It cannot be gained by interfering. Not knowing is true knowledge. Presuming to know is a disease. First, realize that you are sick. Then you can move toward health. The master is her own physician. She has healed herself of all knowing. Thus, she is truly whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Venerable